Injured baby deer limped into a backyard. Single mum realized why it refused to leave her porch. The morning mist clung to the grass like a whisper, soft and grey, as Claire Mitchell stepped onto her back porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee. The sky was just beginning to blush with the first pale light of dawn, the kind of quiet hour when the world still felt half asleep. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill her lungs, a brief moment of peace before the chaos of the day began. Her daughter Emma would be awake soon, demanding breakfast and asking 100 questions before 7 a.m., as 5-year-olds do. But for now, Claire had this. Just her, the silence, and the ache in her shoulders from another restless night. She sipped her coffee and glanced across the yard. That's when she saw it. A fawn, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, stood near the edge of the porch steps. Its coat was dappled with white spots, still carrying the softness of infancy, but something was wrong. The little deer wasn't moving with the graceful curiosity typical of its kind. It limped, heavily, painfully, dragging its left hind leg, as though each step cost it everything. Its dark eyes, wide and glistening, locked onto Claire with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was no fear in that gaze, only need. Claire set her mug down on the porch railing, her heart already tightening in her chest. She'd lived in this rural corner of Pennsylvania for 3 years now, ever since the divorce, and she'd seen plenty of wildlife. Deer wandered through regularly, raccoons raided the trash, and once she'd even spotted a fox slinking through the early morning fog. But this was different. This fawn wasn't just passing through. It had come here deliberately, limping all the way up to her porch, and now it stood there, trembling, refusing to move. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and stay with us. "Hey there, little one," Claire whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze. She took a cautious step forward, watching for any sign that the fawn might bolt. But it didn't. It stayed rooted in place, its injured leg held awkwardly off the ground, its small body shivering despite the warmth beginning to creep into the morning air. Claire crouched down slowly, her knees pressing into the damp wood of the porch. The fawn's breathing was shallow and rapid, its ribs expanding and contracting like a fragile bellows. She could see the wound now, a deep gash along the inside of its hind leg, crusted with dried blood and dirt. It looked like something had torn into the flesh, maybe barbed wire or a sharp branch during a panicked flight. The leg was swollen, the skin around the wound angry and red. "Oh, sweetheart," Claire murmured, her throat tightening. "What happened to you?" The fawn blinked at her, and for a moment Claire could have sworn it understood. There was something achingly human in that look, a plea that transcended species. "Help me, please." She stood up carefully, her mind already racing. She wasn't a veterinarian. She wasn't even particularly outdoorsy. She was a single mother working 2 part-time jobs, one at the local grocery store, the other doing bookkeeping from home, and barely making ends meet. The last thing she needed was to take on the responsibility of an injured wild animal. The rational part of her brain told her to call animal control, let the professionals handle it. But as she looked down at the fawn, so small and helpless, she knew she couldn't just walk away. "Okay," she said softly, more to herself than to the deer. "Okay, let's figure this out." She went inside, moving quietly so as not to wake Emma, and grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter. A quick search told her what she already suspected. Injured wildlife should be handled by trained rehabilitators or animal control. She found the number for a local wildlife rescue center and dialed, pacing the kitchen as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a recorded message clicked on. "You've reached Greenfield Wildlife Rescue. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. If this is an emergency, please leave a message and we'll return your call as soon as possible." Claire glanced at the clock on the microwave. 6:45 a.m. Saturday morning. She left a message, her voice tight with urgency, describing the fawn and its injury, then hung up and pressed her palms against the cool countertop. She had no idea when or if they'd call back. When she returned to the porch, the fawn was still there. It had moved closer, now standing at the base of the steps, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Claire felt a pang of guilt. The little creature was probably starving. Fawns this young still nursed from their mothers, but where was the doe? Had she abandoned this baby because of the injury, or had something worse happened to her? Claire went back inside and rummaged through the fridge. She had no idea what to feed a baby deer, but she pulled out a bowl of fresh water and a handful of lettuce, unsure if it would help. She placed both at the edge of the porch and stepped back. The fawn limped forward, its movements slow and labored, and dipped its muzzle into the water. It drank deeply, desperately, and Claire felt a small flicker of relief, but the lettuce went untouched. "Not hungry for that, huh?" she said quietly. The fawn finished drinking and lifted its head, water droplets clinging to the soft fur around its mouth. Then it did something that made Claire's chest tighten all over again. It limped past the water bowl, past the lettuce, and moved directly to the corner of the porch, near the old wicker chair where Claire often sat in the evenings. And there it lay down, folding its legs beneath its body and resting its head on the weathered wood. It wasn't leaving. Claire stared at the fawn, her mind spinning. Why here? Why her porch? The backyard stretched out behind the house, offering plenty of cover and soft grass. There were bushes along the fence line where the deer could have hidden, away from predators. But instead, it had chosen this spot right next to her home, and it was refusing to move. "You're scared," Claire said softly, realization dawning. "You don't feel safe out there, do you?" The fawn's ears twitched, but it didn't lift its head. Its dark eyes remained open, watching Claire with a mixture of exhaustion and trust that made her heart ache. She pulled the wicker chair closer and sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. The sun was climbing higher now, casting golden light across the yard, and somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. Claire watched the fawn's shallow breathing, the rise and fall of its small rib cage, and made a silent promise. "I'll help you," she whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Behind her, the screen door creaked open, and Claire turned to see Emma standing there in her pajamas, her blonde curls messy from sleep, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy," Emma breathed, her voice filled with awe. "Is that a baby deer?" Claire nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sweetie, it's hurt. We need to be very quiet and gentle, okay?" Emma tiptoed forward, her small hand reaching for Claire's. Together they stood on the porch, watching the fawn as it rested in the corner, fragile and trusting, refusing to leave. And Claire knew in that moment that their lives had just changed. Emma crouched beside her mother, her small fingers still wrapped around Claire's hand. The little girl's eyes were fixed on the fawn with the kind of pure, unfiltered wonder that only children possess. Claire could feel her daughter's excitement vibrating through her tiny frame, could see the questions forming on her lips even before she spoke. "Why is it on our porch?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think it's hurt and scared," Claire answered softly. "Sometimes when animals are hurt, they look for a safe place to rest. Can we keep it?" Claire's heart squeezed. She'd known that question was coming. "No, sweetheart. It's a wild animal. It has a family out there somewhere. We just need to help it get better, and then it'll go back to the woods." Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who'd learned early that life didn't always give you what you wanted. Claire knew that look well. She'd seen it on Emma's face when her father stopped showing up for his weekend visits, when they'd had to move out of their bigger house into this smaller rental. When Claire had explained again and again that Daddy wasn't coming back, that it was just the two of them now, just the two of them. That phrase had become Claire's mantra over the past 2 years. She'd repeated it during the lonely nights, during the moments when the bills piled up faster than her paychecks could cover them. During the times when Emma asked why other kids had 2 parents at school events and she only had one, just the two of them, and they were enough. But looking at this injured fawn, Claire felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe they weren't just two anymore. Maybe, for a little while, they could be three. The morning unfolded slowly. Claire called in sick to her Saturday shift at the grocery store, something she never did, something that would cost her money she couldn't afford to lose, but she couldn't leave the fawn alone. Emma sat cross-legged on the porch, watching the little deer with unwavering attention, while Claire researched fawn care on her laptop at the kitchen table. The information was overwhelming and often contradictory. Some sites said never to touch a fawn, that the mother would reject it if it carried human scent. Others explained that injured fawns needed immediate intervention. Claire read about colostrum and goat's milk, about the dangers of dehydration and infection, about how fragile these creatures were and how easily they could die from stress alone. Her phone rang just after 9 a.m. Claire nearly dropped it in her rush to answer. "This is Sarah from Greenfield Wildlife Rescue, returning your call about an injured fawn?" Relief flooded through Claire. "Yes, thank you so much for calling back. There's a baby deer on my porch. It has a pretty bad wound on its hind leg. It's been here since dawn and won't leave." There was a pause on the other end. "Can you describe the wound?" Claire did, in as much detail as she could remember. When she finished, Sarah sighed. "That sounds like it needs medical attention. The problem is, we're completely full right now. We've had an unusually high intake this month, and we don't have space for another fawn. I can put you on a waiting list, but it might be several days before we can take it." Claire's stomach dropped. "Several days? But it's injured. The wound looks infected." "I understand, and I'm sorry. Your best option is to contact animal control. They can evaluate the situation and potentially transport it to a veterinary clinic. And if they can't help," another pause, longer this time, "then you might need to consider whether the fawn is suffering. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let nature take its course." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Claire thanked Sarah and ended the call, her hands trembling slightly. Let nature take its course. That was a gentle way of saying, let it die. She walked back to the porch where Emma was singing softly to the fawn, a made-up song about sunshine and flowers. The little deer's eyes were half closed, its breathing still shallow but slightly more even than before. It looked peaceful there, with Emma's voice washing over it like a lullaby. Claire couldn't let it die. She just couldn't. She called animal control next. The dispatcher was polite but firm. They could send an officer out, but if the animal wasn't posing a threat to humans or property, and if it wasn't in immediate distress, their resources were limited. They might be able to transport it to a facility, but there was no guarantee. It could take hours for an officer to arrive. Hours the fawn might not have. Claire made a decision then, one that went against her cautious nature, against the practical voice in her head that always urged her to play it safe. She would take care of the fawn herself, at least until she could find proper help. She drove to the local feed store, leaving Emma with strict instructions not to touch the deer, just to sit and keep it company. The teenager behind the counter looked skeptical when Claire explained what she needed. "You know fawns are really hard to keep alive, right? Even the professionals lose them sometimes." "I know," Claire said, "but I have to try." She left with goat's milk, electrolyte solution, bottles designed for feeding baby animals, and antibacterial ointment. The total came to $63, money she'd budgeted for groceries, but she handed over her card without hesitation. Back home, she found Emma exactly where she'd left her, still sitting on the porch, still watching the fawn with patient devotion. Claire's heart swelled with love for her daughter, for this little girl who'd learned empathy despite all the hardship they'd faced. "Okay, baby," Claire said softly, "let's see if we can help our friend." She warmed the goat's milk carefully, mixing it with electrolyte solution the way the internet had instructed. The fawn watched her approach with wary eyes, its body tensing. Claire moved slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice, the same tone she used when Emma had nightmares. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." She offered the bottle, but the fawn turned its head away. Claire tried again, gently pressing the nipple against its mouth. Nothing. The little deer wasn't interested. Or maybe it was too weak, too traumatized to accept help. "Please," Claire whispered, and she wasn't sure if she was talking to the fawn or to the universe or to some part of herself that desperately needed this to work. "Please drink." Emma scooted closer. "Maybe it doesn't know it's food, Mommy." Claire looked at her daughter, at her earnest face and trusting eyes, and felt tears prick at the corners of her own. When had Emma gotten so wise? When had this little girl, who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings, learned to problem-solve through compassion? "You might be right," Claire said. She dipped her finger in the milk and let a drop fall onto the fawn's nose. The little deer's tongue flicked out instinctively, tasting. Its eyes widened slightly. Claire tried the bottle again, and this time, miracle of small miracles, the fawn latched on. It drank slowly, hesitantly at first, then with growing eagerness. The sound of its suckling filled the quiet porch, and Claire felt something break open inside her chest, some tight knot of worry and exhaustion finally beginning to unravel. "Good job," Emma cheered softly, clapping her hands. "You did it, Mummy." But Claire's focus was already on the wound. Once the fawn finished drinking, she carefully examined the gash. It was worse up close than she'd realized. Deep, angry, seeping. She cleaned it as gently as she could with warm water and antiseptic, her hands steady, despite the fear churning in her stomach. The fawn flinched and whimpered, a sound so heartbreaking that Emma started to cry. "It's okay, baby," Claire said to both the deer and her daughter. "I'm almost done. I'm so sorry, but this has to be cleaned." When she finally finished, she wrapped the leg loosely with gauze she'd found in their medicine cabinet. The fawn lay panting, exhausted from the ordeal, but it didn't try to run. It stayed on the porch in its chosen corner, watching Claire with those deep, trusting eyes. Emma named the fawn Grace. "Because she's graceful," Emma explained, though the irony of naming a limping deer Grace wasn't lost on Claire, but the name stuck. Grace. A reminder of something beautiful and fragile that had wandered into their lives when they least expected it. That night, after Emma was in bed, Claire sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Grace was sleeping, her small body rising and falling with each breath. The stars were out, scattered across the dark sky like diamonds, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Claire thought about her own mother, who'd passed away when Claire was 16. She thought about the years of struggling to prove she was strong enough, capable enough to make it on her own. About the marriage that had slowly suffocated her until she'd finally found the courage to leave. About every time she'd felt small and helpless and inadequate. And she thought about this fawn, this tiny creature that had chosen her porch, her home, her care. Why? What had Grace seen in this rundown rental house with its peeling paint and overgrown grass? What had made her feel safe here? Maybe it was the same thing Claire had been searching for all these years. A place where being wounded didn't make you unwanted. A place where you could rest without fear. A place where someone would notice you were hurting and decide to stay. "We're going to be okay, Grace," Claire whispered into the darkness. "All three of us. We're going to be okay." The fawn's ear twitched in her sleep, and somewhere in the woods beyond, an owl called out to the night. Claire pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning arrived with rain. Not the gentle spring kind that nourishes gardens and makes everything smell fresh, but a heavy, relentless downpour that turned the backyard into a muddy swamp and drummed against the roof like a warning. Claire woke to the sound of it, her body stiff from having dozed off in the wicker chair sometime around 3 a.m. She'd meant to go inside after checking on Grace one last time, but exhaustion had claimed her right there on the porch. Grace was awake, standing now, or trying to. The fawn had moved to the edge of the porch, where the overhang provided shelter from the rain, and was staring out at the woods beyond the fence line. There was something in her posture, something tense and alert, that made Claire's breath catch. The little deer's ears were pricked forward, rotating slightly, tracking some sound Claire couldn't hear. "What is it, girl?" Claire murmured, pushing herself up from the chair. Every muscle in her back protested. "What do you hear?" Grace didn't acknowledge her. The fawn remained frozen, focused on something in the distance, her injured leg trembling from the effort of standing. Claire followed her gaze, but saw nothing through the sheets of rain, just the grey outline of trees and the blurred shapes of bushes swaying in the wind. Then she heard it, faint, almost lost beneath the noise of the storm. A sound that made her skin prickle, a cry, high-pitched, desperate. Another fawn. Claire's heart began to race. She stepped to the edge of the porch, squinting through the downpour, and that's when she saw it. A flash of movement near the back fence, something small and brown struggling through the mud. Another fawn, smaller than Grace, was trying to climb through a gap in the fence line. But the mud had made everything slippery, and the little creature kept sliding backward, its cries growing more frantic with each failed attempt. "Oh, my God!" Claire breathed. Grace made a sound then, something between a bleat and a whimper, and took a lurching step forward despite her injury. She was trying to go to the other fawn, trying to reach it. Understanding hit Claire like a physical blow. Grace hadn't come here randomly. She hadn't chosen this porch by accident. She'd been leading the way. She'd been trying to bring her sibling, or perhaps her own baby, though Grace seemed too young for that, to safety. And when she'd gotten injured, when she couldn't go any further, she'd stopped here, at the closest house, at the first place that might offer help. And now the other fawn was out there, alone, struggling, crying for Grace. Claire didn't think. She ran down the porch steps, ignoring the rain that immediately soaked through her clothes, and sprinted across the yard. Her feet sank into the mud with each step, slowing her down, but she kept going. The small fawn saw her coming and tried to bolt, but it was too exhausted, too disoriented. It collapsed in the mud, its sides heaving, its eyes rolling with terror. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," Claire said, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her own heart was hammering. She reached the fawn and gathered it into her arms. It was lighter than she expected, all delicate bones and soft fur. It struggled weakly, but Claire held firm, murmuring reassurances as she turned and slogged back toward the house. By the time she reached the porch, she was drenched and gasping. Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her mouth open in shock. "Mummy, there's another one." "I know, sweetie. Move back. Give me space." Claire climbed the steps and set the second fawn down near Grace. The two animals immediately moved toward each other, their noses touching, their small bodies pressing close. Grace made soft, throaty sounds, and the other fawn, even smaller, even more fragile, responded with exhausted chirps. They were siblings. Claire was certain of it now. Twins probably, born in late spring to a doe who was somewhere out there in the storm. Or maybe not. Maybe the doe was dead, killed by a car or a predator, and these two babies had been wandering alone, terrified and starving, until Grace had spotted this house and made the decision that saved both their lives. "Emma, go get more towels, and the blanket from my bed. Hurry." Emma disappeared inside, and Claire knelt beside the two fawns. The new arrival was in even worse shape than Grace had been. Its coat was matted with mud and rain, and it was shivering violently, its body temperature clearly dropping. No visible injuries, but dehydration and hypothermia were just as deadly. Emma returned with an armful of towels and the quilt from Claire's bed. Together, they dried the second fawn as best they could, rubbing the towels briskly over its small body to generate warmth. Claire wrapped it in the quilt and pulled it close, using her own body heat. The fawn was too weak to resist. It simply lay there, trembling against her chest, its breathing rapid and shallow. "Is it going to die?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. "Not if I can help it," Claire said, more fiercely than she'd intended. She spent the next hour bringing the second fawn back from the edge. More goat's milk, warmed carefully, electrolyte solution administered drop by drop when the fawn was too weak to suckle. Emma held Grace, stroking her dappled coat and whispering stories about magical forests and brave deer families, while Claire focused every ounce of energy on keeping the smaller fawn alive. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the shivering eased. The fawn's breathing grew less ragged. Its eyes, which had been glazed with exhaustion and shock, began to focus. When it finally latched onto the bottle and drank on its own, Claire felt tears stream down her face. Silent, relieved tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Emma named the second fawn Hope. "Because we hoped she would be okay, and she is," Emma said simply, and Claire couldn't argue with that logic. By midday, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Both fawns were sleeping, curled together in the corner of the porch, on a nest of old blankets and towels. Grace's leg still concerned Claire. The swelling hadn't gone down much, and she worried about infection, but at least both animals were alive, warm, and fed. Claire sat on the porch steps, her phone in her hand, staring at her bank account balance. The feed store purchases had put her over budget. She had $17 until her next paycheck, which wasn't for another week. She'd missed her Saturday shift, which meant less money on that check. Emma needed new shoes. The ones she had were getting too small, her toes cramped against the front. The electric bill was due in 3 days, and now she had 2 injured fawns to care for, not just one. The rational thing to do would be to call animal control again, insist they come pick up the deer, transfer the responsibility to someone who actually knew what they were doing. Claire wasn't equipped for this. She wasn't a wildlife rehabilitator. She was barely keeping herself and Emma afloat, but when she looked at Grace and Hope, sleeping peacefully, safe for the first time in who knows how long, she couldn't do it. These animals had chosen her. They had trusted her. Grace could have stopped at any house along whatever long journey she'd made through the woods, but she'd chosen this one, this Porch, this woman who was barely holding her own life together. Maybe that was the point. Maybe Grace had sensed something in Claire, some kindred desperation, some shared understanding of what it meant to be wounded and still searching for safety. Maybe helping Grace and Hope wasn't about Claire being a savior. Maybe it was about all 3 of them, all 4 of them, counting Emma, finding a way to heal together. Claire's phone buzzed. A text from her ex-husband, David, the first communication she'd had from him in 3 months. "Need to talk about reducing child support. Lost my job. Call me." Claire stared at the message, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. Child support. The $200 a month that David grudgingly sent, when he remembered, was supposed to help with Emma's needs. It was never enough, but it was something, and now he wanted to reduce it or stop it altogether. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, then another. She thought about the choices she'd made in her life, about the moments when she'd been strong and the moments when she'd wanted to give up. She thought about Emma, sleeping inside the house, and about Grace and Hope, sleeping on the porch. She thought about all the wounded, broken, struggling creatures in the world who just needed someone to see them, to care, to say, "I won't let you fall." "No," Claire whispered to herself. "Not this time. Not today." She deleted David's text without responding. She'd deal with that later. Right now she had 2 baby deer to keep alive, a daughter to raise, and a spine to keep straight. Inside the house, Emma appeared in the doorway with her art supplies. "Mommy, can I draw Grace and Hope? I want to remember what they look like." Claire smiled, feeling something warm bloom in her chest despite everything. "Of course, baby. That's a beautiful idea." Emma settled cross-legged on the porch with her colored pencils and paper, her tongue poking out in concentration as she drew. Claire watched her daughter's small hands move across the page, capturing the curve of Grace's spotted back, the delicate legs of Hope tucked beneath her body, and in that moment, sitting on a porch with 2 injured fawns and a 5-year-old artist, Claire understood something fundamental. They were all surviving the storm together. Not just weathering it, but actively choosing to fight, to care, to hold on. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family, all four of them. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, sending golden light across the yard, and Grace opened her eyes. She looked directly at Claire, and for the first time there was something besides fear and pain in that gaze. There was recognition, there was gratitude, there was trust. The following days fell into a rhythm that was equal parts exhausting and extraordinary. Claire's life, which had felt so small and constrained, work, home, Emma, bills, repeat, suddenly expanded to include dawn feedings and wound cleanings, research sessions on fawn behavior, and constant vigilance over two fragile lives that depended entirely on her. Grace's leg was healing, but slowly. Each morning, Claire unwrapped the gauze with gentle fingers, cleaned the wound with antiseptic, and applied fresh antibacterial ointment before rewrapping it. The angry redness had started to fade, replaced by the pink of new tissue forming, but the swelling remained stubborn. Grace bore the daily ritual with stoic patience, her dark eyes fixed on Claire's face, as if she understood that this pain was necessary, that these hands were helping even when they hurt. Hope, meanwhile, was thriving. The smaller fawn had recovered from her near-death experience with the remarkable resilience of youth. Within 2 days, she was strong enough to stand without wobbling, to nurse eagerly from the bottle, to explore the boundaries of the porch with curious, tentative steps. She was the braver of the two, the more adventurous one, while Grace remained cautious and watchful, as if her injury had taught her that the world could wound you when you least expected it. Emma was in heaven. She woke up each morning asking about her deer, spent every free moment sitting with them, and had filled an entire sketchbook with drawings of Grace and Hope in various poses. She'd even written a story at kindergarten about the deer family that came to live with us, which her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had called Claire about with gentle concern. "Emma's been telling the class that you're taking care of wild deer," Mrs. Henderson had said carefully. "I wanted to check in. Is everything okay at home?" Claire had explained the situation, perhaps a bit more defensively than necessary, emphasizing that it was temporary, that she was trying to find proper placement for the fawns, that she wasn't running some kind of illegal wildlife operation. Mrs. Henderson had been understanding, but had gently reminded Claire that wild animals could carry diseases, that a small child shouldn't be in such close contact with them. The call had planted seeds of doubt that grew in the quiet moments. Was she being irresponsible? Was she putting Emma at risk? Was she so desperate to feel needed, to feel like she was doing something meaningful, that she'd lost sight of common sense? But then she'd watch Emma with the fawns, the gentleness, the joy, the sense of purpose that radiated from her daughter, and the doubts would quiet. Emma was learning empathy in action. She was learning that caring for something vulnerable was hard work, but worth it. She was learning that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easy thing or the convenient thing, but you did it anyway, because it mattered. On the 5th day, Claire finally got a call back from Greenfield Wildlife Rescue. "We have an opening," Sarah said, her voice apologetic. "But I have to be honest with you. We can only take 1 fawn. We just don't have the space for 2. Claire's stomach dropped. "1? But they're siblings. They need to be together." "I understand that, and I'm sorry. Our facility is small and we're overwhelmed. It's either 1 fawn or we can keep both on the waiting list for another week or 2. Claire looked out at the porch where Grace and Hope lay side by side, their bodies pressed together in sleep the way they always were. Separating them felt cruel, wrong. These two had been through trauma together, had found safety together. Grace had risked everything to bring Hope here. How could Claire tear them apart now? "Keep them both on the list," she heard herself say. "I'll manage until you have room for both." After the call ended, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. She'd just committed to at least 2 more weeks of feeding, caring for and worrying about 2 wild animals, 2 more weeks of stretched finances and lost work hours. 2 more weeks of praying that Grace's leg didn't get infected, that Hope didn't develop some illness, that nothing went wrong. Her laptop was still open to a job search page she'd been browsing. She needed more income, needed it desperately, but the thought of going to interviews, of explaining gaps in her resume, of admitting that she'd left her last full-time job because her husband had been the one with the real career and someone needed to be home with Emma, it all felt overwhelming. A knock at the door pulled her from her spiral. Claire opened it to find an older woman standing on her front step, perhaps in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that were sharp with intelligence and something that looked like amusement. "You the one with the fawns?" the woman asked without preamble. Claire blinked. Yes. How did you—" "Margaret Chen. I live 3 houses down. My grandson's in Emma's kindergarten class. Kids talk, and apparently your daughter's been quite the storyteller this week." Margaret's lips quirked into a small smile. "Can I see them?" Claire hesitated, protective instincts flaring. But there was something about Margaret's straightforward demeanor, something competent and trustworthy, that made Claire step aside. "They're on the back porch." Margaret followed her through the house, and when she saw Grace and Hope, she let out a soft sound of understanding. She approached slowly, crouching down with the ease of someone familiar with animals, and observed the fawns with a practiced eye. Grace lifted her head, but didn't shy away. Hope, ever curious, took a small step forward. "That leg's healing well," Margaret said, nodding toward Grace. "You've been doing good work with it. Clean bandaging, proper care. How long have you had them?" 5 days, Claire said quietly. Grace showed up first, injured. Then Hope came the next morning. "I think Grace was trying to lead her to safety." Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the fawns. "Likely twins. Born late spring, probably late May. Mothers either dead or abandoned them. Hard to say which. Whitetails will sometimes leave injured offspring if they think they can't survive." She straightened up, turning to face Claire. "You know what you've taken on here?" "I'm learning as I go," Claire admitted. "Wildlife Rescue has them on a waiting list, but it'll be at least 2 more weeks." 2 weeks minimum, Margaret corrected. "Probably more like 3 or 4, knowing Sarah's operation. She means well, but she's perpetually overwhelmed." She paused, studying Claire with those keen eyes. "I used to be a veterinary technician, worked with large animals mostly, horses, cattle, but I've done my share of wildlife rehabilitation over the years. Retired now, too much time on my hands." Another pause. "I could help if you'd like." Claire felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Help? Teach you proper technique, check on the wound progression, give you some supplies I've got gathering dust in my garage, maybe take a shift or 2 with the feeding so you can get some proper sleep." Margaret's expression softened just slightly. "I know what it's like, trying to save something when you can barely keep yourself afloat. I was a single mother once too, long time ago, but you don't forget." Claire's eyes burned with sudden tears. She'd been holding everything together through sheer stubbornness, refusing to admit how exhausted she was, how scared, how desperately she needed help. And here it was, offered freely by a stranger who somehow understood. "I can't pay you," Claire said, her voice rough. Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Didn't ask you to. Consider it a favor between neighbors. Besides, those 2 need proper care, and I can see you're doing your best, but you could use some guidance." She turned back to the fawns. "First thing, that milk mixture you're using. Is it whole goat's milk?" "Yes, with electrolyte solution." "Good. But you should be adding a probiotic. Fawns have delicate digestive systems. I've got some at home that'll work." Margaret knelt again, gently running her hand along Grace's injured leg, checking the bandaging. Grace allowed the touch, sensing perhaps that these hands knew what they were doing. "This needs to be wrapped differently. You're doing it right for a human wound, but deer legs need more support, especially if she's trying to put weight on it. I'll show you." For the next hour, Margaret stayed, teaching Claire techniques she'd learned over decades of animal care. How to wrap Grace's leg to provide maximum support while allowing circulation. how to check for signs of infection beyond just redness and swelling, how to encourage the fawns to start nibbling on solid food, tender leaves, not lettuce, to prepare them for eventual release, how to create a more structured feeding schedule that would promote healthy digestion. Emma watched the whole lesson with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she'd been paying closer attention to the fawns than Claire had realized. Margaret answered each one seriously, treating Emma like a fellow caretaker rather than just a child. When Margaret finally stood to leave, she placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You're doing something good here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. These babies would be dead if not for you. That matters." "Thank you," Claire managed, the words inadequate for what she was feeling. "I'll be back tomorrow with those supplies." "And Claire?" Margaret paused at the door. "Sometimes the things that wander into our lives are exactly what we need, even if we don't understand why at first, even if they complicate everything." After Margaret left, Claire sat on the porch with Emma, watching Grace and Hope in the golden light of late afternoon. The fawns were more active now, Hope bouncing on her delicate legs, while Grace watched with what could only be described as sisterly exasperation. "Mommy," Emma said quietly, "are we going to be sad when they leave?" Claire pulled her daughter close. "Yes, baby, we're going to be very sad. But we'll also be happy, right? Because they'll be free?" Claire pressed a kiss to Emma's hair, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Yes, we'll be happy for them too. That's what love is sometimes, letting go of what you want because it's what's best for them." Emma nodded solemnly, and they sat together in silence, watching the fawns play. And Claire thought about all the things she'd let go of over the years. Her marriage, her old life, her dreams of what family was supposed to look like. She thought about how each letting go had hurt, but how each one had also made space for something new, something true, something worth fighting for. Grace looked up at her then, and Claire could have sworn the fawn was smiling. It happened on the 8th night. Claire had been asleep, actual deep sleep in her own bed for the first time in over a week, thanks to Margaret taking the midnight feeding shift. The older woman had been true to her word, showing up every day with supplies, knowledge, and a steady presence that made everything feel just a little more manageable. Under Margaret's guidance, Grace's wound had been improving steadily. The swelling had gone down, the tissue was knitting together, and the fawn had even started putting more weight on the injured leg. Everything had been going well. Too well, Claire realized later, because life had taught her that good things were always temporary. The sound that woke her was one she'd never forget, a cry of pain so raw, so primal, that it sent her bolt upright in bed with her heart already racing. Grace. That was Grace screaming. Claire ran through the house in her pajamas, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor, and burst through the back door onto the porch. The motion sensor light flickered on, illuminating a scene that made her blood run cold. Grace was down on her side, her body convulsing with shivers, her injured leg extended at an unnatural angle. The carefully wrapped bandage was soaked through with something dark, not just blood, but something else, something that glistened yellowish under the harsh light. The smell hit Claire a second later, thick and putrid. Infection, serious infection. Hope was pressed against her sister, making desperate chirping sounds, nudging Grace with her nose as if she could somehow wake her from this nightmare. But Grace's eyes were glazed, unfocused, her breathing rapid and shallow. Fever. The wound had gone septic. "No, no, no," Claire breathed, dropping to her knees beside the fawn. She touched Grace's neck. The skin was burning hot beneath her fingers. "Grace, hold on, just hold on." She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called Margaret. It rang 4 times, 4 eternities, before the older woman's sleep-rough voice answered. "Claire? What's wrong?" "It's Grace. The wound. It's infected. Bad. She's burning up and there's discharge and she's convulsing." "I don't know what to do. Margaret, I don't know what to do." "I'm coming. Don't move her. Keep her warm. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes stretched into forever. Claire covered Grace with blankets, trying to still the violent shivers. She spoke to the fawn in a constant stream of reassurances that felt hollow even as she said them. Emma appeared in the doorway, woken by the commotion, her small face pale with fear. "Mommy, what's happening to Grace?" "She's sick, baby. But Margaret's coming to help." "Is she going to die?" Claire opened her mouth to say no, to offer the comforting lie that parents tell their children, but the words stuck in her throat. She looked at Grace, at this fawn who'd chosen to trust them, who'd fought so hard to survive, and she couldn't lie, not about this. "I don't know," Claire whispered. "I'm going to do everything I can to save her, but I don't know." Emma came and sat beside her mother, taking Claire's free hand in both of hers. They waited together in the harsh porch light, listening to Grace's labored breathing, until headlights swept across the yard and Margaret's old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Margaret moved with the swift efficiency of someone who'd handled countless emergencies. She had a large veterinary kit with her, the kind used for livestock, and she set it on the porch with careful precision before kneeling beside Grace. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know. I found her maybe 15 minutes ago. She was fine at the evening feeding. That was around 8. What time is it now?" "Just past 2 a.m. Margaret's hands moved over Grace's body, checking temperature, pulse, respiration. Her face remained neutral, professional, but Claire saw the tightness around her eyes. The infection spread faster than I expected. Probably had a pocket of bacteria we couldn't see, deep in the tissue. It ruptured tonight, and now it's in her bloodstream. What does that mean?" Margaret looked up, and in her eyes Claire saw the truth before she spoke it. "It means she's in septic shock. Without immediate intervention, antibiotics, IV fluids, possibly surgery, she'll die, probably by morning." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of cold dread through Claire's body. "Then we take her to an emergency vet. Now, I'll drive." "Claire," Margaret's voice was gentle but firm, "the nearest emergency veterinary clinic that handles wildlife is 2 hours away in Pittsburgh. Grace won't survive the drive. And even if she did—" Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "The cost of emergency surgery, intensive care, antibiotics, we're talking thousands of dollars, maybe 5,000, maybe more. $5,000. Claire's entire savings account had $312 in it. She had credit cards, but they were all maxed out from the divorce, from the move, from the hundreds of small emergencies that had piled up over the past 2 years. She had nothing, less than nothing. "There has to be something," Claire said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "There has to be something we can do." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on Grace's side, feeling the rapid, stuttering heartbeat beneath the ribs. When she spoke, her voice was measured, heavy with years of experience making impossible choices. "There is one option. I have veterinary-grade antibiotics in my supplies at home, left over from when I did livestock work, and I have IV equipment. If we act fast, and I mean right now, I might be able to flush the wound, get antibiotics into her system, stabilize her enough that her body can fight this off." She met Claire's eyes. "But I need to be very clear with you. I'm not a licensed veterinarian anymore. I'm a 72-year-old retired vet tech who hasn't done field surgery in 15 years. There's a very real chance this won't work. There's a chance I could make things worse. And if anything goes wrong, you can't sue me, can't blame me, because technically what I'm about to do is practicing without a license." "I don't care about any of that," Claire said immediately. "Will you try? Are you sure? Because the other option is to call animal control right now. They'll come, they'll take her, and they'll euthanize her humanely. No more pain, quick and peaceful." Claire looked down at Grace. The fawn's eyes had closed, but her body was still shivering despite the blankets. Hope was curled against her, refusing to leave her sister's side even as the humans hovered over them. And Claire thought about the morning Grace had first appeared on this porch, injured and desperate and trusting. She thought about the way Grace had led Hope to safety. She thought about courage, real courage, the kind that doesn't know if it will succeed, but tries anyway because the alternative is surrender. Try, Claire said. Please, try to save her. Margaret nodded once, sharp and decisive. Emma, honey, I need you to go inside and stay there. What we're about to do isn't something you should see. But Grace, we'll be in good hands. Your mum and I are going to help her, but we need space to work. Can you be brave for Grace? Emma looked between the adults and the fawn, tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded, kissed her mother's cheek and went inside. Through the window, Claire could see her daughter sitting at the kitchen table, her hands pressed together in prayer, even though they weren't a religious family. It was pure faith, faith that love could be enough, that trying mattered, that Grace would somehow survive. I need my supplies, Margaret said. Stay with her, keep her warm. I'll be back in 10 minutes. And Claire, she paused at the steps. Boil water, as much as you can. We need everything as sterile as possible. Claire set every pot she owned to boil while watching Grace through the window. The fawn hadn't moved. Hope refused to leave her sister's side, and Claire didn't have the heart to separate them. When Margaret returned, she carried 2 large cases and moved with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Here's what's going to happen, Margaret said, laying out instruments on a clean towel. I'm going to sedate her, just enough to keep her still and dull the pain. Then I'm going to open the wound, clean out the infected tissue, flush it with antiseptic. After that, intramuscular antibiotics and subcutaneous fluids. If we're lucky, if her body responds, the fever will break by dawn. If not, she didn't finish the sentence. Tell me what to do, Claire said. Hold the light. Follow my instructions exactly. And don't look away, no matter what you see. The next hour was both eternal and instantaneous. Margaret worked with steady hands, her fingers sure despite her age, while Claire held the battery-powered work lamp steady and followed every instruction. The sedative took effect quickly, Grace's body finally going still, and then Margaret began. The wound was worse than either of them had realized. Beneath the surface healing, a pocket of infection had formed deep in the muscle tissue. Margaret opened it carefully, and the smell that emerged made Claire's stomach turn. She thought she might vomit, but she forced herself to breathe through her mouth and keep the light steady. Suction, Margaret said, and Claire used a turkey baster, sanitized in boiling water, to remove the infected discharge while Margaret cut away necrotic tissue. It was brutal, necessary work, and Claire found herself whispering to Grace the whole time. You're doing so good, sweetheart, so brave. Just hold on, please hold on. Margaret flushed the wound with antiseptic, then packed it with antibiotic-impregnated gauze. This stays in for 12 hours, then we remove it and reassess. Now, the antibiotics. She prepared a large syringe with a mixture of broad-spectrum antibiotics and injected it into Grace's hindquarter, away from the wound site. Then came the subcutaneous fluids, a bag of electrolyte solution administered under the skin at the scruff of the neck. Grace's body looked strange, lumpy, where the fluid pooled, but Margaret assured Claire it would absorb. Now we wait, Margaret said, sitting back on her heels. Her hands were steady, but Claire could see the exhaustion in the lines of her face. The next few hours will tell us everything. If the antibiotics work, the fever will break. If not, she'll make it, Claire said fiercely. She has to. They moved Grace to a nest of blankets in the warmest corner of the porch. Hope immediately curled up beside her sister, and this time Margaret didn't object. Sometimes, the older woman said quietly, the will to live comes from knowing you're not alone. Margaret wanted to stay, but Claire could see how tired she was. Go home. Get some rest. I'll call you if anything changes. You should sleep too. I can't. Not until I know she's okay. Margaret squeezed Claire's shoulder. You're a good mother. To Emma, to these fawns. Don't forget that. She gathered her supplies and left, and Claire was alone with the deer in the quiet hum of night. Emma crept back out around 4 a.m., wrapped in her blanket. Claire made room for her daughter, and they sat together, watching Grace breathe. The fawn's sides rose and fell, each breath a small miracle. Hope slept, with her head resting on Grace's neck, as if she could anchor her sister to life through sheer proximity. "Tell me a story, Mommy," Emma whispered. "A happy one." So Claire did. She told a story about two sister deer who lived in a magical forest where no one was ever hurt, where mothers never left, where everyone who needed help found it. She told it in a soft voice, making it up as she went, and somewhere in the telling, Emma fell asleep against her side. The sky began to lighten around 5:30, the darkness giving way to grey, then pink, then gold. Birds started their morning chorus. The world was waking up, continuing on as it always did, indifferent to the small drama playing out on this porch. And then, just as the first rays of sun touched the yard, Grace opened her eyes. She looked at Claire with clear, focused awareness. Her sides were still rising and falling rapidly, but the desperate shallow quality was gone. And when Claire carefully touched her neck, the burning heat had diminished. Not gone, but less. Definitely less. "Grace," Claire breathed. "Oh, Grace." The fawn made a soft sound, and Hope woke instantly, nuzzling her sister. The two fawns touched noses, and Claire saw Grace's tail flick once. Weak, but there. She called Margaret, who answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. "The fever broke," Claire said, her voice cracking. "It broke. She's awake." Margaret's exhale was audible even over the phone. "Thank God. I'll be there in an hour to check on her. But Claire, we're not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours are critical, but if she made it through the night," Margaret's voice softened with something like wonder. "She's a fighter. They both are." When Margaret arrived, she examined Grace thoroughly and declared the immediate crisis past. "The antibiotics are working. The wound needs to stay packed for now, but the drainage looks cleaner already. She's going to need round-the-clock monitoring for the next few days, and more antibiotic injections every 12 hours. "I can do that," Claire said without hesitation. Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally, "I believe you can." That afternoon, while Grace slept and Hope dozed beside her, Claire sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee and watched the sun move across the sky. Emma was inside, drawing another picture, this one titled, "The Day We Saved Grace," in wobbly kindergarten handwriting. Claire thought about the night before, about making the choice to try even when failure seemed more likely than success, about Margaret driving over in the middle of the night, risking her reputation and her freedom to help save a wild animal, about Emma's faith, expressed in whispered prayers at the kitchen table, about Hope, refusing to leave her sister's side even when death seemed inevitable, about Grace herself, fighting through pain and fever and infection because somewhere deep in her small animal brain she wanted to live. They had all been so brave together, and somehow, impossibly, it had been enough. Grace's recovery was slow, measured in small victories that felt monumental. The first time she stood on her own without trembling, the first time she put full weight on her injured leg, the first time she took tentative steps across the porch, Hope bouncing excitedly beside her. Each milestone was celebrated quietly by Claire and Emma, witnessed by Margaret, who came by twice daily to check the wound and administer antibiotics. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The gash that had nearly killed Grace was now a pink scar, still tender but closed and healing clean. The fawn's coat had regained its luster, and her eyes were bright and alert again. Hope had grown stronger too, more confident, her legs no longer spindly but sturdy. Both fawns were eating solid foods now, tender shoots and leaves that Margaret brought from her property, supplementing the bottle feedings that were becoming less frequent. The change wasn't just in the deer, it was in all of them. Emma had developed a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She spoke up more in kindergarten, Mrs. Henderson reported, particularly when the class discussed animals or nature. She'd organized a fundraiser, with her teacher's help, collecting spare change from classmates to help other animals like Grace and Hope. They'd raised $47, which Emma had proudly presented to Claire to save for the next animal that needs us. The next animal, as if this was just the beginning, not a singular event. And maybe Emma was right. Margaret had become a fixture in their lives, joining them for dinner twice a week, teaching Emma about animal behavior and biology with the patience of a natural educator. She'd told Claire late one evening after Emma had gone to bed that these past weeks had given her purpose again. "I thought retirement meant my useful days were over," Margaret had said quietly. "But maybe usefulness isn't about your age or your job title. Maybe it's about showing up when someone needs you." And Claire had transformed in ways she was only beginning to understand. She'd called her ex-husband back about the child support, not with the defensive anxiety she usually felt during their conversations, but with a calm, steel-edged firmness that surprised them both. "You want to reduce support? Fine, but we're going back to court, and we're doing this legally. And while we're there, we're going to talk about the months you didn't pay at all. So think carefully about what you really want, David." He'd backed down, promised the payments would continue. She'd hung up feeling something she hadn't felt in years, powerful, in control. She'd also applied for a full-time position at a local accounting firm, a job that would use her degree, the one she'd earned before marriage, and motherhood had derailed her career. The interview was next week, and for the first time, she wasn't terrified of it. She'd kept two baby deer alive through crisis after crisis. She'd learned medical procedures from a 72-year-old retired vet tech. She'd made life-or-death decisions at 2 a.m. If she could do all that, she could certainly handle a job interview. The fawns had taught her something fundamental. She was stronger than she'd believed, braver, more capable. She'd spent so many years feeling like she was barely surviving, just treading water, always one crisis away from drowning. But these past weeks had shown her that survival wasn't the same as weakness. Survival was its own kind of strength. On a warm afternoon in late June, Margaret came to the porch with news. Sarah called from Greenfield Wildlife Rescue. They have space for both fawns now. They can take them this weekend. Claire had known this moment was coming. She'd been preparing herself for it, or trying to, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the chest. This weekend, 3 days away. "That's good," she managed. "That's what we've been waiting for." Margaret's expression was understanding. "It's okay to be sad about it. I know, it's just—" Claire looked at Grace and Hope, playing together in a patch of afternoon sunlight. "They're ready. I can see that. Grace's leg is strong enough. They're both healthy, eating well. They need to be with their own kind, learning how to be wild again. I know all that. But you love them," Margaret finished gently. "And love doesn't care about logic." That evening, Claire told Emma, they sat together on the porch steps while the fawns dozed nearby, Hope's head resting on Grace's back the way it always did. "The rescue center has room for them now," Claire said carefully. "This weekend, Grace and Hope are going to go live there. It's a big place with woods and other deer. They'll learn how to live in the wild again, and eventually they'll be released into a forest where they can be free." Emma was quiet for a long time, her small hands clasped in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but thick with emotion. "Will they remember us?" Claire's throat tightened. "I don't know, baby. Probably not. At least not the way we remember them. Their memories work differently than ours, but they'll remember that someone helped them when they needed it. They'll remember that they were safe here." "I'm going to remember them forever," Emma said. "Every single thing. The way Grace looks at you when you feed her, the way Hope's ears twitch when she's sleepy, the spots on their backs, everything." "Me too," Claire whispered. "Mommy, are you sad?" "Yes, very sad." "But also happy?" Claire pulled Emma close. "Yes, also happy, because they're going to have a good life now. A wild life the way they're supposed to, and we got to be part of their story, even if just for a little while." "We saved them," Emma said, and it wasn't a question. "We did." You, me, Margaret, we all saved them together. Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder, then in a small voice, "Who saved us, Mommy?" The question caught Claire off guard. She started to say that they didn't need saving, that they were fine. But the automatic response died on her lips, because it wasn't true. They had needed saving in their own way, from loneliness, from feeling small and powerless, from forgetting that they mattered, that their choices could make a difference. "I think," Claire said slowly, "maybe we all saved each other. Grace and Hope needed us to help them heal, and we needed them to remember that we're strong enough to help, brave enough to care, even when things are hard." The next 3 days passed too quickly. Claire took photos, dozens of them, knowing that pictures couldn't capture what this had really been like, but needing some kind of record anyway. Emma made goodbye cards with elaborate drawings and messages written in her careful, deliberate handwriting. "Dear Grace, you are the bravest dear ever. Love, Emma. Dear Hope, I will never forget you. Love, Emma." Margaret helped them prepare the fawns for transport, explaining that the rescue centre would continue their rehabilitation, gradually reducing human contact to help them retain their natural wariness. "They'll be afraid of people again," Margaret said. "That's good. That's how they stay safe in the wild," Claire understood. But it still hurt to think that Grace and Hope would eventually forget the trust they'd learned here, would see humans as threats again, rather than helpers. But that was the price of freedom. Wildness required caution. It required fear. Without it, they wouldn't survive. On Saturday morning, Sarah arrived with a van equipped for animal transport. She was younger than Claire had imagined, maybe 30, with kind eyes and capable hands. She examined both fawns thoroughly, checked Grace's healed wound, and pronounced them both in excellent condition. "You did remarkable work," Sarah said to Claire. "Truly. Most people don't have the knowledge or dedication to bring a fawn through septic shock. You gave her a second chance." "I had help," Claire said, nodding toward Margaret. "We all did," Margaret added, smiling at Emma. Loading the fawns into the transport crates was harder than Claire had anticipated. Hope went first, lured by fresh apple slices, and though she balked at the unfamiliar enclosure, she eventually settled. But Grace seemed to understand what was happening. She looked at Claire with those deep, intelligent eyes, and for a moment, Claire saw recognition there. Gratitude. Goodbye. "Thank you for trusting me," Claire whispered, running her hand along Grace's dappled coat one last time. "Be safe out there. Be wild and free and alive." Grace nuzzled Claire's palm once, then turned and walked into the crate beside her sister. Emma was crying openly now, and Claire gathered her daughter close as Sarah secured the crates and prepared to leave. "You can visit them," Sarah offered. "Not immediately. We need to minimize human contact during rehabilitation. But in a few weeks, once they're settled, you could come see how they're doing." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood in the driveway, Claire, Emma, and Margaret, and watched the van pull away, carrying Grace and Hope toward their new life. Emma waved until the vehicle disappeared around the corner, her small hand moving back and forth in the morning air. The porch felt empty without them. Claire and Emma stood there for a long time, staring at the corner where the fawns had slept, at the water bowl still sitting by the steps, at the evidence of the past month scattered everywhere. The house felt different, quieter, but not in a bad way, in a way that felt like the space after a deep breath, like possibility waiting to be filled. "We did a good thing, didn't we, Mummy?" Emma asked. Claire looked down at her daughter, at this brave, compassionate little girl who'd learned that love sometimes meant letting go. "We did the best thing," she said. Margaret squeezed Claire's shoulder. "I should head home. Let you two have some time." "Margaret," Claire turned to face her. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," Margaret said firmly. "You would have found a way. But I'm glad I was here to help." She smiled. "And I expect I'll see you both soon. After all, someone needs to teach Emma about the birds that nest in my oak tree. And I have a feeling you're going to need a reference for that job interview." After Margaret left, Claire and Emma went inside. The house felt simultaneously too quiet and perfectly peaceful. They made pancakes for lunch, Emma's favorite, and ate them on the back porch, looking out at the yard where Grace and Hope had played. "What do we do now?" Emma asked. Claire considered the question. What did they do now? The fawns were gone. Life would return to normal. Work, school, bills, routines. But something had shifted. Something fundamental. They weren't the same people who'd found an injured fawn on their porch 4 weeks ago. They'd been transformed by compassion, by the act of caring for something vulnerable, by the discovery that they were capable of so much more than they'd believed. "Now," Claire said, "we remember, and we keep going, and we keep helping whenever we can." "The next animal that needs us?" Emma asked hopefully. Claire smiled. "Maybe, or the next person, or the next situation where we can make a difference." She pulled Emma close. "We learned something important these past weeks. We learned that we're strong, that we can handle hard things, that we matter." Emma nodded, resting her head against her mother's shoulder, and they sat together in the afternoon sun, 2 survivors who'd saved 2 others, all 4 forever changed by the courage it took to care. 3 months later, on a crisp September morning, Claire pulled into the parking lot of Greenfield Wildlife Rescue with Emma buckled in the back seat. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of gold and crimson appearing among the green, and the air carried that particular clarity that comes with early autumn. It was their 3rd visit. Sarah had called 6 weeks after Grace and Hope's arrival to say the fawns were doing well, adapting to their rehabilitation environment, beginning to show appropriate wariness around humans. That first visit had been bittersweet, watching Grace and Hope from a distance, seeing them move through the wooded enclosure with other deer, knowing they no longer needed the humans who'd saved them. Emma had cried on the drive home, but they'd been good tears, the kind that came from love rather than loss. The second visit, 2 weeks ago, had been easier. Grace's limp was completely gone, her leg strong and sure. Hope had grown, her spots beginning to fade as she matured. They moved like wild creatures now, alert and cautious, and when Claire had called Grace's name softly, the fawn hadn't responded, hadn't even looked her way. It should have hurt, but instead, Claire had felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what they'd worked for. This was success. Today was different. Today was release day. Sarah met them at the entrance, smiling warmly. "They're ready. We're releasing them into the state forest about an hour from here. Good habitat, healthy deer population, minimal human activity. Grace and Hope will go together, along with 2 other rehabilitated fawns. They'll have each other, at least initially." "Can we watch?" Emma asked, her hand tight in Claire's. "That's why I invited you. You're part of their story. You should see the ending." They drove in convoy. Sarah's van carrying the transport crates, Claire's old sedan following behind. Margaret had wanted to come, but her arthritis was acting up, so she'd sent them off with a thermos of hot chocolate and instructions to take pictures. "For my records," she'd said gruffly, though Claire suspected it was more about the heart than documentation. The release site was a clearing deep in the forest, surrounded by towering oaks and maples. A small stream cut through the underbrush, and the morning sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. It was beautiful, the kind of place that felt untouched, ancient, safe. Sarah and 2 other staff members unloaded the crates carefully, spacing them out across the clearing. "We'll open them simultaneously and then retreat immediately," Sarah explained. "Let them emerge on their own time, without pressure. Sometimes they bolt right away, sometimes they take a while to work up the courage." Claire and Emma stood back at the tree line with the other humans, a small group of staff and volunteers who'd come to witness this moment. There was something sacred about it, Claire thought. This ceremony of return, this gift of freedom being given back to creatures who'd temporarily lost it. "Ready?" Sarah called. At the nods from her team, she counted down. 3, 2, 1. The crate doors opened in unison. For a moment, Nothing happened. The forest held its breath. Then Hope emerged first, as Claire had known she would, the brave one, the curious one, always leading. The young deer stepped out tentatively, her nose twitching, her ears rotating to catch every sound. She looked back at the crate, bleating softly, and Grace appeared. She moved carefully, testing her once injured leg before putting full weight on it, but there was no hesitation in her gait. She was whole, healed. She touched noses with Hope, and the two sisters stood together in the clearing, surrounded by forest, with the whole wild world stretching out before them. The other fawns emerged from their crates, joining Grace and Hope. For a few heartbeats, all 4 deer stood in the clearing together, a small constellation of dappled coats and dark eyes. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they moved, not running but walking with purpose, into the underbrush. Grace and Hope led the way, side by side as they'd always been, and within seconds they'd vanished into the green shadows. Emma squeezed Claire's hand so hard it hurt, but Claire didn't pull away. They stood there long after the deer had disappeared, long after the other observers had returned to their vehicles, just staring at the place where Grace and Hope had been. "They're free," Emma whispered finally. "They're free," Claire echoed. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotion of the morning. Claire drove in silence, her mind wandering over the past 3 months. So much had changed. Everything had changed. She'd gotten the accounting job, started 2 weeks after Grace and Hope left, and thrown herself into the work with a focus and confidence that surprised her new employers. She was good at it, better than she'd remembered being before she'd set aside her career for marriage and motherhood. The steady paycheck had eased the constant financial anxiety that had colored every decision for the past 2 years. They still weren't comfortable, but they weren't drowning anymore either. Emma had flourished. Her teacher had commented on how much more engaged she was, how she'd become a leader among her classmates, particularly when it came to empathy and kindness. "She has an old soul," Mrs. Henderson had said during their last conference. "She understands compassion in a way that's rare for a 5-year-old. And Margaret had become family, not by blood, but by choice. The kind of family that shows up not because they have to, but because they want to. She'd been at Emma's 6th birthday party, teaching the children about butterflies and bird migration. She'd been there for dinner when Claire got the job offer, bringing champagne to celebrate. She'd been there on the hard days too, the ones when the weight of single parenthood felt crushing, offering not solutions, but presence, the gift of being seen. But the biggest change was in Claire herself, something internal, something that couldn't be measured in paychecks or job titles, or even in the joy on Emma's face. She'd discovered a reservoir of strength she hadn't known existed. She'd learned that she could make life or death decisions and live with the consequences. She'd learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. She'd learned that sometimes the things that seem like burdens, 2 injured fawns, impossible responsibility, a crisis in the middle of the night, are actually opportunities to discover who you really are. Grace and Hope had wandered onto her porch, broken and desperate, and in saving them, Claire had somehow saved herself. A week after the release, Claire stood on her back porch with her morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The porch looked different now, emptier without the fawns, but also cleaner, more organized. They'd scrubbed away all evidence of the past months, but the memory remained in every corner. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Come over when you can. Something to show you." Claire drove over after dropping Emma at school, curious. She found Margaret in her garage, which had been converted into a makeshift workshop, and there, mounted on the wall, was a wooden sign, hand-carved and painted with surprising skill. It read, "Hope House Wildlife Recovery." "I've been thinking," Margaret said, watching Claire's face, "about starting something official, not a full rescue center. I'm too old for that kind of commitment. But a small operation. A way station for injured wildlife that needs short-term care before going to larger facilities. I've got the space, the knowledge, the equipment, and I thought—" She paused, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I thought maybe you and Emma might want to be part of it, when you have time, if you're interested." Claire stared at the sign, feeling something warm and bright expanding in her chest. Hope House. Named after the smaller fawn, the one who'd been hours from death, who'd fought her way back with nothing but will and the love of those around her. "Margaret, Claire's voice caught. "Yes, absolutely yes." The older woman's face creased into a smile. "Good, because I already filed the paperwork. We're official as of next week." She handed Claire a folder. "And I listed you as co-founder. Hope that's all right." Claire opened the folder to see the registration documents. There, in black and white, Hope House Wildlife Recovery, founded by Margaret Chen and Claire Mitchell. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, grateful tears. "Why did you do this?" Claire asked softly. "Because Grace and Hope taught me something I'd forgotten," Margaret said. "That it's never too late to start over, never too late to matter. I thought my useful days were behind me, but those two fawns and you and Emma reminded me that usefulness isn't about age. It's about showing up. It's about caring when it would be easier not to, and I figure we've got a lot more caring left to do." That evening, Claire told Emma about Hope House over dinner. Her daughter's face lit up with the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that made everything worthwhile. "So we can help more animals. Like Grace and Hope." "Like Grace and Hope," Claire confirmed. "Will they come back?" Emma asked. "Grace and Hope, I mean. Will they remember where we live?" Claire thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated. Deer had strong territorial instincts and good memories for safe locations, but Grace and Hope were learning to be wild now. They were learning to trust their instincts, to fear humans, to run rather than approach. The chances of them returning were slim. But then again, Grace had found them once, against all odds. She'd chosen this house, this porch, this family. "I don't know if they'll come back," Claire said honestly, "but I like to think that somewhere out there they remember being safe here. They remember that when they needed help, they found it. And maybe that knowledge, that the world can be kind, that there are places and people who will catch you when you fall, maybe that stays with them. Maybe that helps them survive." "I hope so," Emma said softly. "Me too, baby. Me too." Months turned into a year. Hope House took in 3 more fawns that first winter, then a fox kit with a broken leg, then a family of raccoons, orphaned when their mother was hit by a car. Claire and Emma spent weekends at Margaret's property, learning and helping and healing, both the animals and themselves. Claire still stood on her porch some mornings with her coffee, looking out at the yard where Grace and Hope had played. And sometimes, especially on quiet dawns, when the mist clung to the grass and the world felt soft with possibility, she thought she saw movement at the tree line. A flash of dappled brown, the flick of a white tail. She never knew if it was real or wishful thinking, and it didn't really matter. What mattered was the lesson those 2 fawns had taught her, that courage looked like limping to a stranger's porch when you had nowhere else to go. That love looked like staying up all night to fight for a life that wasn't your own. That family could be built from broken pieces. That hope could be found in the darkest moments. And that sometimes the things that wander into your life when you least expect them are exactly what you need to remember who you are. Grace and Hope were out there somewhere, running free through forests they'd almost never seen. And here, on this porch where their story had begun, Claire stood strong and whole, ready for whatever wandered into her life next. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that being brave enough to care, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when you don't know if it will work, that's what makes you human, that's what makes you alive. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, and a new day began. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed or lived something like this.